Yeah. All right, good. So let's go ahead and get started. And welcome. This is our last live session, but I'll just, before we get into the content for today, I just wanted to run through quickly where we are in the process. So, and first I'll have Bruno close the door there so that we're not interrupted. So we have, this is the fourth of 4 live sessions. Again, a lot of this content that we've been trying to put to you has been in order to hand back to you a lot of the action going forward, and that action really is about this group assignment or group project that we've designed. And this is where I'll run through a few slides just to remind people of that, because it's the tricky part is now we need to ask you to sort of self-organize within those groups in order to move that forward. And we, you know, both Bruno, myself, and Amy are very available to you to try to create some structure around that, to create some, we've created a couple of, at least one sort of interim milestone in that. But so we'll be watching, and we're absolutely ready to help. And this is the tricky stage, because how do you get a lot of busy people with a lot of things going on outside of the course and in their professional and personal lives and make time to do this. So I just want to start off by saying this is now the challenge, is shifting gears once we finish with the content of the course. But that doesn't mean that from our side at Imperial that we're done. We're certainly looking for ways that we can support you in bringing that to fruition. Okay, so I just have a couple slides here to look at that. And there we go. Okay, so the reminder is that we put out a due date of the 14th of January, so hopefully a bit of time, enough time to do that. Each group has, you know, between 9 and 10 individuals, so there's certainly plenty of capacity to get it done. But the question will be one of coordination, probably not really a lack of knowledge. That's certainly the case, and we've been really pleased that a number of participants are really experts themselves on this topic. So this is a great way for you to express what you see as the possibilities. So what we've asked for is a 10-year strategic plan to be written in sort of a memo format. And with each group has been assigned a different company. That hopefully makes it quite real. There is no participant from any of those companies. So here we're sort of, as we were consultants, designing that for companies, but we wanted to make that very real to some specific companies so that you would have things about their location, about their energy consumption, all of that. So I'm sorry, I can't quite hear you. Maybe if there's maybe I'll look in the chat here in case there's a question. No, okay, unintentional. Okay, so the memo we're asking is this is the request that it should be an analysis of the energy needs, looking specifically at the states in which they operate and how the regulatory context would allow for either third party procurement or on-site renewables. Looking at the rationale that they might be talking about, including a short summary of how the economics would stack up, and some description of whether, based upon the characteristics of that kind of company, whether it would be whether it be preferable about how to finance the assets that you'd be suggesting would be in their own interest to develop. So you see the companies there. Everyone should know which group that they are in. What we've done on the next slide here, and again, we'll put this onto the platform, but is to try to provide some structure for what this could be. It's really up to you, but we don't want this to be entirely starting from a blank page. So what we've put there is a rough outline of what this memo could look like. And if that's useful, great. If you'd like to do something slightly different, that's perfect as well. What we really would like to do is to make sure that the content around what we're calling sections 1 through 3, which are really background, we'd very much like you to send that to us by Friday, the 4th of January. And that's because this won't require as much sort of coordination within the group, and it's much more generic analysis than it is specific to the company. And if we could create an interim milestone, then hopefully it means that everything doesn't get pushed to the last minute. We're certainly discussing with Shuva and her colleagues at CII how these projects and the presentation of these projects could be used as informing both regulators and other investors about what a group of experts within a learning program have seen as both the opportunities and challenges. So we expect to share this externally and hope to create some impact outside of the course from this activity. So if you could please correspond with us by email on that. And again, the two dates there are the 4th of January and the 14th of January. And before we get into the content for the live session today, I'll just have a couple of reminders. One is that there's a chat area specifically set up for each group. That's under the assignment tab within edX, and there's a specific area called the stream private space. That's where we would think it's the easiest thing to begin the chat with your group. Each of those spaces is only pertinent to the 9 to 10 individuals who are within each group, so you know that you're speaking with the right people. You will probably need to schedule some kind of group meeting. Zoom has been great for us. It's free to use and it works really well. So we'd suggest that would be a thing to do. You will probably need to have a group project leader, or maybe several leaders who hand over to each other at different weeks going forward. So we'd really ask you to self-nominate yourself in the private stream as if you're willing and able to do that. Again, every group needs a nominal leader. So we see as kind of step one in the process is that you get some structure around who's going to be coordinating the activity. And then finally, just to say that we have been recording this podcast every week. We've really done that in a way as to summarize, and as much to summarize for you all who are in the course, but actually probably more than that for those outside the course, so that they would have some idea about what we've been discussing and what are the issues that are coming up. So we'd be really happy for you to share that link to others, whether that's post that on LinkedIn or send by email. And hopefully that helps us increase the external impact of the course. So there's just a question here. Is the group assignment or is an individual one? This is entirely a group assignment. There is no individual assignment from the course. And so we thought that the best way to kind of harness the collective wisdom was for this to be a group assignment. So hopefully that clarifies. It is just a group assignment. Okay, are there any questions about that before we move on? Okay, good. So with that, we have a guest, as we have had every week. Dinesh from EY will be familiar, I think, to many of you. And what we've asked Dinesh to talk about is particularly EY's involvement in the setup of this lending facility between the World Bank and SBI, and to talk through both from EY's experience in working in that space, but then there'll be some more. I've also asked him to provide some personal reflections towards the back end of his presentation on what he sees as the opportunities, and this gives us a great chance to debate as a group and bring to a close at least one portion of the course. So Dinesh, really thank you very much for joining us. We'll, as we have before, we'll try to break this into two pieces. So they'll go through a number of slides. Dinesh will go through a number of slides, probably about 10 minutes, and then we'll open up for questions and debate. And then there's a second part of the presentation that should bring us to more discussion and debate. And again, we'll try to close here by within 45 minutes from now. Okay, so with that, Dinesh, I'll hand it over to you, and you can go ahead and share the share your screen, and look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you so much, Charles. And first of all, let me thank you and the team, Bruno and Amy, for setting this up, and also giving this opportunity to talk to the team or the participants in terms of the part of the training program or the online course they are going through right now. It has been a kind of a long journey for me. I'll just give a very quick overview of my background to a few of them who are seeing me or hearing me for the first time. So I'm an engineering graduate with energy as the master's, and I've been in this field in renewable energy and climate change for the past 25 years. There's been a long journey both in India and Singapore as well, and I had a brief stints in London and Thailand as well. So we have been kind of closely associated with most of these governments wherever we go, wherever I joined the companies, and it has been a great experience to understand the policy, the financial and the regulatory aspects of how the governments are, both the state governments in India as well as Singapore as a country, and UK as a country as well. So a lot of experience in terms of fine-tuning how the renewable energy sector could be further enhanced in terms of the performance, not only in just installation, but also on the performance and moving forward. So that's a quick background. Currently, I'm serving Ernst & Young. I'm the team leader for a $14 million World Bank program. This is a State Bank of India, World Bank, and MNRE's technical assistance program, exclusively for managing the rooftop solar implementation by creating enabling environment in 17 Indian states. So prior to this, I was working with USAID PACE-D program. I worked on behalf of Nexent, the US-based company, and I was leading a $21 million program similar to this, but it had all the four components: renewable energy, energy efficiency, cleaner fossil fuels, and financing aspect, cutting across all the three themes actually. So that's the quick background. So without much ado, let me quickly spend a couple of minutes in terms of setting the scene. You would have seen this context in many presentation before and all the articles that you are reading. But the message from this slide is largely towards to show the strength of the distributed energy and how it is going to really play a major role, and how India and globally also the power sector is going to move away from centralized generation towards distributed energy resources. So you have smart kind of technologies, you have even the blockchain trying to define how the power sector could be more efficient. But having said that, the empowering has come on the consumer right now. So right now we call the consumer as a prosumer, which means that he can produce as well as he can consume, and therefore he has best of both the worlds, and therefore understands the challenges and the barriers, or enjoys the benefits of being a producer as well. So I think we are moving towards this value chain in terms of how the disruption is going to come from the distributed energy networks. So that's the purpose of this slide. Moving forward, I'll be trying to kind of focus only on solar rooftop and the kind of analysis of the participants and their background. I'm not going into the details of the fundamentals of the rooftop solar. So I learned from the organizers that you had interactions with the stalwarts in this sector. So I'm going to kind of move into a specific topic of the rooftop solar. And then, as Charles said, we will be having a break in terms of completing one session first, or one theme first, and then we can move to a kind of a more interactive session where we can discuss several other topics related to kind of increasing the deployment or accelerating the deployment of rooftop solar. So coming to the grid connected rooftop solar sector, the kind of barriers which we had analyzed a kind of a couple of years ago, I would say, when I was in USA, it was largely related to these four buckets. And as you all know, in India, the policy and regulatory framework is so challenging to kind of decipher across the states, though we have CRC playing a great role in kind of providing the model regulations and also guiding the states as and when there is a challenge. But still we have a lot of areas which we have to improvise in terms of policy and regulatory in the rooftop sector. So very recently, we have been quite successful in working for CERC and trying to get the model regulations updated for solar rooftop, which was originally approved in 2013. So that's one area I pick up as the topmost priority in this slide. But having said that, the two buckets related to awareness and capacity building has not been given enough impetus so far. That's my personal opinion, that we always think that it's just a kind of outreach materials or collaterals you prepare and then circulate it. There is no kind of a post-awareness campaigns in terms of understanding how the target audience have benefited out of such campaigns or any other aspects of it. And in terms of capacity building, it is just a kind of a training programs, whether it is online or offline, but it is not necessitating the building of the capacity. So we find always a difference between a typical capacity building program and a kind of an effort to build the capacity of the stakeholders. I personally see a lot of difference between these two. And we try to kind of address it by having a post-assessment mechanism where we try to see how this kind of capacity building initiatives have really delivered what it should do, and in terms of how the stakeholders have really benefited out of it. And not only they are benefiting it, but they are transferring their experience to their colleagues or other departments where they are moving to. In terms of process streamlining, the solar rooftop sector is suffering a major setback in terms of the lack of standardization, especially in the approval processes within the utilities as well as with the state nodal agency. There is a lot of challenges that the consumers are facing today, including the developers who are themselves implementing the RESCO projects. So therefore, there is a kind of an urgent need to understand what is an effective process streamlining, what are the efficiencies that could be gained by both the parties, both the consumer as well as the DISCOM or the SNA in processing these applications, and also trying to engage not only just till the sanction of or the installation of the project, but also try to engage with them post-implementation. A DISCOM or an SNA should be equally engaged with them even post kind of installation of these projects. So we had kind of tried to summarize the major barriers here, and then basis which we launched this technical assistance program. So as you all know, it was a competitive bidding, and Ernst & Young won this technical assistance program. The premise was that we had to be very focused and sharp in terms of bringing forward the kind of lessons learned from the previous technical assistance program, and also try to help India to kind of accelerate the implementation in terms of the 40 gigawatt target set by the Government of India. So our interventions approach us kind of in 6 areas, as you could see in the slide. And as I mentioned to you briefly before, we are working with around 17 states. The entire northeastern states also we are trying to help them in terms of how to create the enabling environment. So the kind of interventions we implement under each and every category here are reviewed and approved by a steering committee. And the steering committee comprises of the World Bank, MNRE, and the SBI. And according to the kind of priority given by the state, as well as the national priorities, these activities are approved by the steering committee, and accordingly we start implementing it. So we started early this year in terms of the actual implementation of the activities. And we have been quite engaging with all the 17 states. And believe me, it is not an easy task to kind of engage with the 17 Indian states at the same time. But having said that, there's a lot of efforts in terms of using our resources and our consortium partners. We have 5 additional consortium partners along with EY, and we try to work with all the stakeholders which you see in the bottom of the slide. And it has been a kind of a very rewarding and revealing experience, I should say, in terms of how these stakeholders are coming up and kind of expressing their concerns and the challenges, and even offering solutions to kind of move forward in this sector. So very quickly, what the SSPA program has done so far is that we have successfully implemented the demand aggregation program, which is the theme of my today's presentation. And we enabled Madhya Pradesh to kind of launch this tender successfully, along with their technical team inside the state nodal agency for largely the government buildings. So this is a very big program of 40 megawatt plus. And they are now moving towards the commercial and industrial sector as well. But this is a very good experience and a case study for all of us to look into. And if you wish, you can let know the organizers, and I can send you more information separately on how Madhya Pradesh was successful. So this is a kind of a demand aggregation program where 40 megawatt was announced as a tender for solar rooftop, and they got very good response, which I will share it in the next slide. Then the second activity which we took, as I very briefly mentioned, is that we were engaged by CERC, and then under this program, and we helped CERC to develop this model rooftop solar regulation. And very recently, the Forum of Regulators approved the model regulations, and we are in the final stages of getting it kind of published by the FOR. And then we will carry out some outreach events across the states who would like to then adopt the new measures under this model rooftop solar regulations. The other aspects, of course, we work with the northeastern states for policies for Sikkim and Meghalaya to develop some exclusive rooftop solar policies. And the most important part, the next point is for the MSME sector, we are currently developing a credit guarantee mechanism similar to what you would have heard from the gentleman from CPI before, that this would be utilized by SBI and other banks, and that could be kind of helping MSME sector along with the ongoing credit guarantee that they have for the MSME sector, so that we can increase the uptake of rooftop solar. And under this study, we kind of focused on the cold storage and the automobile sector. The last one, as I told you, it is very important, and I also see one of the experts from the Skill Council being a part of this program. That we are partnering with Skill Council, and so far we have trained 300 stakeholders across these two segments, utility engineers and bankers, and we also trained 50 trainers across 14 to 16 training institutes across these 17 states. The last but not the least is also that we are in the process of finalizing and publishing a national level media and outreach documents for solar rooftop, which could be then adopted by the Indian states, and we'll also assist them in translating in their vernacular languages as well. So that's a quick kind of a summary of what we are doing. It's a very detailed engagement, intensive engagement with both at the center as well as the 17 states. So now I'm moving into the theme of today's presentation very quickly, is that under our program, we have this as a separate intervention, which I explained to you before. And we have a kind of an 8-step approach under this demand aggregation program. And of course, it is left to the state to pick up which one they need when they try to engage us. And we also do a gap assessment initially, and then try to give a kind of a proposal to them under the technical assistance program. And then the state nodal agency and the DISCOM then try to understand how much help they need from us for implementing this. So as you could see, it is basically the kind of aggregation support in creating a kind of a pool of demand, because most of the developers are spending a lot of resources in the market acquisition or in the customers acquisition. And therefore we felt that it would be very nice to have this aggregation support. And it is not an easy exercise, believe me, but right now we are targeting the government buildings. That would be kind of the first demand. And then the state nodal agency can issue a tender based on the aggregation that we have supplied to them. And of course, there is the feasibility assessment. I'll come to that in a bit when we do the aggregation support. And then in terms of creating the kind of enabling environment for all the vendors to be aware of what is happening and whether they are empaneled within the state, whether it's a mandated requirement or not. So we help them also in the vendor empanelment framework, and also try to select the vendors and how they can empanel them and make them eligible to participate in the bids. And the PPAs and RFPs, both the documentation, we are trying to help the states based on a couple of options. One is a standardized template, which very recently MP documents have been standardized, and we have submitted this to most of the states. and MNRE as well. And there are a few other contracts and RFPs which the state themselves are comfortable with. So therefore, we try to review them or design a new document based on the requirement, and then try to provide them these documentations. So it's a kind of a comprehensive engagement with the state nodal agency or the DISCOM, whomsoever is willing to publish this tender, and therefore the support is from the scratch of the demand aggregation to trying to bring the entire stakeholders or the consumers on board. The last point is as you are mostly aware by this time, that the DISCOM has a different perception in terms of implementation of rooftop solar, because they feel that they lose cream of their consumers because of this intervention. And therefore, we had to really engage with the DISCOM and try to give them the realistic picture in terms of what is the impact on the revenues and how they could mitigate that situation by also taking part in implementing the rooftop solar on their own. And you would have again seen some business model presentation by CEW team, where the DISCOMs can take a lot of engagement with the sector, and then try to not only reduce the impact of the revenues, but also try to make additional revenues as well by implementing the rooftop sector. This theme has been kind of really helped us to understand the current status, and therefore we feel that this could be the way forward. And having said that, this has to be tested in several states. Right now, we are working in at least I should say 7 to 8 states, based on the experience we have gathered from Madhya Pradesh. And I should say that the response has been tremendous in terms of how we can help them in all these 8 steps in creating demand aggregation towards the tender. Yeah. This is a slide which I would like to kind of present to you and also get a feedback from you, and I'll be stopping here for interactions. In terms of the benefits, as I mentioned to you before, for the DISCOM, instead of kind of moving away from the rooftop sector, they should be a part of this. Otherwise, there's going to be 2 eventualities. One, the business as usual, the consumers are going to implement solar rooftop behind the meter, which is not a good scenario for any DISCOM. And the second part is that they are going to also reduce the kind of power drawal from the DISCOM, which is going to impact the DISCOM in terms of their own scheduling and forecasting what is the requirement, and therefore their revenue impact in terms of the committed power they have. So from that angle, we feel that the DISCOMs can benefit a lot by engaging with the current rooftop solar segment, and they can also try to become one of the leaders in propagating the deployment of solar rooftop. The next, of course, is the consumer himself, and definitely the consumer today takes a decision only based on the savings, and therefore it is a cost aspect that would make him decide to implement it either on a capex mode or on a RESCO mode. And beyond that, once the implementation is completed, installation is completed, then the quality aspects comes in play. And we are in the kind of the initial stages of understanding the failures or the bad installations that have been done in the rooftop solar, but it is quite timely that we also address this issue so that the consumer is happy with that. The RESCO or the vendor, as you are aware, has a lot of business interest in this. The RESCO model is now going leaps and bounds in India right now, and it is growing every year. And therefore, they need a lot of access to finance, and that also necessitates that the lenders are happy with the way the payment assurance is done for them by the consumers or by the state government who is taking care of it. So therefore, that aspect for the RESCO is quite critical, and there is a need to really create an investment platform for the RESCOs who also fall under the MSME categories, and that is quite important for us to enable them to implement more projects on ground. The lender, as I told you, he would always like to bring down the cost, and that should help them to make the sector quite viable by having standardized documentation, standardized process, and also access to different types of funding, both domestic and international. And therefore, there is a lot of effort which is now being done to make the lender comfortable and aware, so that they can make an informed decision while sanctioning these projects. So I'll just pause briefly here, and then I open the floor for some initial reactions Specifically, I would like to know from you guys, like how you understood the demand aggregation as one of the key aspects for facilitating rooftop solar implementation in the country.
Okay, Dinesh, that's great. So this is a great moment to debate. It all sounds very good, sounds very convincing, but I'd be really interested in people who have experience of interacting with the program or could benefit potentially from this approach. What are their impressions and what are their thoughts? So I'll leave that open either in the chat or people can go ahead and just unmute themselves and ask questions directly.
Hi, this is Raj. I had a quick question on the creditworthiness of the MSMEs. Now, in the RESCO model, I'm just keen to understand, is World Bank itself sort of taking the responsibility of credit enhancements of the end user customers or the people who would actually be paying for the electricity, or how does it work?
Yeah. So as I mentioned to you earlier, the facility is managed by State Bank of India, and World Bank, of course, had an initial engagement with them to finalize the operational manual for appraisal and funding. And SBI does follow specific criteria that has been also imposed. I shouldn't use the word imposed, but shared or suggested by World Bank for evaluating the creditworthiness of the client. But having said that, the current system of the Indian financial market, as you are aware, in terms of trying to reduce the NPA as much as possible, there is a lot of discussions in terms of tightening the whole appraisal process. So having said that, the SBI does follow certain aspects which are agreed between World Bank and SBI for lending this, but they also largely follow their own kind of assessing, their own way of assessing the creditworthiness of the clients. So I should say that the collateral requirement, for example, which is the next kind of a possible query from you or by any other colleague, the SBI is not basically insisting on collaterals, but having said that, when they do the appraisal, they feel that the credit rating is not the way they had kind of anticipated, and therefore most of the branches in SBI, that what we heard as a feedback is that they are insisting on collaterals for the rooftop loans if it is on the project mode. If it is on the kind of a program mode where the RESCOs are basically getting the loan, so far we have seen only the large scale players are getting the line of credit from SBI. So therefore we haven't seen much of a problem in that. But in terms of how the individual projects that they are going to implement under their program mode would also be a factor for SBI to say yes or no to implement, to allow RESCOs to implement in the small scale kind of a high risk projects as well. To give you a direct reply, the credit guarantee or the credit worthiness, there is no guarantee given by World Bank to SBI, but there has been a kind of a $10 million given or allocated by World Bank to SBI to use it as a guarantee for the defaults of the loan by creating an instrument called this credit guarantee mechanism, which we are trying to help SBI right now.
Thank you. The aggregation of demand would then become a responsibility of the RESCOs, right? Or so your role in Ernst & Young is to actually sort of help the RESCOs in aggregating the demand, but the responsibility, accountability, or the business model of RESCO means that responsibility would lie with them, isn't it?
Absolutely. So our engagement is directly and limited with the state government, which is largely the state nodal agency. So we help them in creating that demand, but we also need a lot of government clearances to create that demand because we have to go to those sites and then do the on-site and also have an online access to the coordinates and try to create the documentation for that. So our limited engagement is with the state nodal agency, but of course RESCOs have the larger responsibility in terms of further reviewing the sites, or of course after winning the bid, they are fully responsible for implementation.
Thank you. One last question.
Yeah. No,
Sorry,
please,
go ahead.
Yeah.
So one last question from my side is, interesting point you mentioned is about how Discom should be sort of brought in earlier, and there's an opportunity for Discom to actually earn revenues through this. So quite keen to understand what are some of the levers we are pulling, so that the Discom is sort of convinced that there is an additional revenue stream for them in this. What is the structure?
Yeah. So I believe you would have seen the structures under the CEW presentation, and I'll try to also share that report with you if you don't have one. But very quickly I'll answer this question. Number one is that we have to enable the Discom to understand the revenue impact and the time period of it, actually, because they always look at the short-term revenue impacts and not the long-term, especially the state-owned Discoms. I'm not talking about the private Discoms. The state-owned Discoms have to be empowered to understand the longevity of this revenue impact, and therefore how they could try to then mitigate with the short to medium-term solutions. So very easily you could try to quantify the RPO benefits or the T&D kind of loss reductions or deferred investments in the infrastructure on the distribution side, etc. So that is one aspect we have to leverage in terms of providing them adequate, practical, on-ground information. So that is lacking right now. The number two is that in terms of empowering them to do the business models or carry out the business models within the ambit of the Electricity Act. And there are several models being rolled out. So today we have some experience in the facilitation model that is in Delhi by BSES, where they facilitate the implementation. They may not earn a lot of money out of it, but they want to be kind of in the middle of action and therefore get enough information in terms of what is happening on ground on rooftop solar. So money earning is not the criteria in that model. On the contrary, Kerala Discom has, the electricity board has launched a special purpose vehicle for implementing 500 megawatt of rooftop solar. So there, the business model is quite strong because they have to make a business case for establishing the SPV and therefore make investment and then try to generate power and then make money out of it. So there are different models where the Discoms would like to kind of venture based on their current kind of financial situation, as well as the capacity. As I told you, the utility engineers are not well equipped to launch and be a part of this model overnight. So the build up has to start now. The last point to the response to your question is that we have heard from MNRE that the Shrishti scheme, which is a scheme exclusively designed for incentivizing Discoms, is going to be announced in January. And that may help Discom to understand some incentive that is coming from MNRE. And at the same time, the TA program like us can help the Discom to prepare the business plans and make them more efficient to be a part of this journey.
Thank you.
Dinesh, there was just another question in the chat about it was on the Discom. How are their reactions to net metering and the whole prosumer? You touched, maybe before we move on to your slides, you touched upon this short-term revenue shortfall, which I imagine, for any company or any entity is going to be very, with the sort of pain in the short term for gain in the long term is always a tough sell. But there must also be, that must interact with the financial health of the Discoms and seeing that revenue come out in the short term, I imagine for some is not just, is much more problematic than others. So has there been work to look at exactly to quantify the size of that short-term revenue impact and how that could be dealt with?
Yeah,
let's say.
Yeah, that's a great question. It also kind of your question adds to what Shreya Majumdar has also asked on the chat room. That the short-term revenues are easily quantifiable, largely because we don't have big capacities coming up right now. And if you make a projection based on how many applications you have and how much you expect, and that's really when the Discom sits up and then tries to understand, okay, this is not going to be a short-term impact for me, this is going to be an annual occurrence. So the short-term revenue, there is no kind of a silver bullet to overcome that, largely because the regulations are allowing such kind of an implementation. For example, in Karnataka, the surplus power Discom had to pay 9 rupee 13 paisa per unit, or 9 rupee 36 paisa per unit, which is quite huge in terms of the leakage that the Discom cannot afford. But gradually the rate came down, and then the regulatory commission also tried to pull back those rates as well, and then now they have moderated it. So the short-term impact for the Discom, the straightforward answer to you is that it's very difficult to find a silver bullet to mitigate it. But having said that, there is a possibility of calculating the immediate RPO benefits straight away, one-to-one, so that could be an offset of maybe, let's say, 20 to 30%, for example, theoretically speaking. And then also try to understand the T&D losses in that coverage area where the rooftop solar is being implemented. Those are the immediate mitigation measures to show you on paper what kind of offset you are benefiting out of that. But in reality, the RPO cash flow would be benefiting, would be reduced, and it would be benefiting the Discom if they see and are able to estimate and record all the gross generation of the solar rooftop power from all these installations. So that could be one mitigating point, or a couple of mitigating points for the short-term impact.
Great.
And yeah, and to answer Shreya's question, Shreya Majumdar's question, the models are yet to be bounced off with the entirety. But as I told you, Kerala has taken it up. In Delhi, the BSES has taken it up in the facilitation model. So there are different models. So different utilities are trying to understand how much they can spend their resources and be serious to adopt one or two models. But the experience from this part of the country, which is the northern part where I live, Delhi, to the southern part where I belong, otherwise, has been in the opposite direction. So BSES has done a facilitation model, whereas Kerala has done even an investment model, which means they own it. In between, there is another model which Andhra has recently tried, which is an on-bill financing, but that doesn't really give any revenue or a direct engagement by Discom in the business. But that is another model which has been tried and demonstrated by one of the Discom. And in terms of in terms of how they feel, the reactions which you are asking me, as I told you, it is very difficult for Discom to immediately absorb and acknowledge what is happening on ground. But the change is happening. Very slowly, they will be able to understand how things could improve.
Right.
The next question by Shua, the answer is that we did 100%. So we did the entire kind of mapping. I have the next slide on that. So I will explain to you more on this. So we did 100% coverage. And then in terms of the templates, yeah, there was a portal to have access to all this data. That also will explain in the next slide.
So maybe in the essence of time, we should let's move on to that. Make sure that we move on to so that we can see the rest of the slides, and then hopefully that leaves us about, if we take another 5 minutes with slides, and we leave ourselves 10 minutes for more discussion.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So just to summarize what happened in the MP Madhya Pradesh tender. To achieve the lowest tariff, which I think most of you are aware of it. The lowest was 1.58 Indian rupees per unit for the power grid. This had a tag of close to around 47% of subsidy, both from the central government as well as from the state government. So what all you see there, the tariff, it is all the tariff after a subsidy of 43 to 47%. And then this was naturally less than the utilities electricity tariff, way below what they are paying currently. So all these consumers were extremely happy with the outcome. And in terms of the subsidy recovery process, so that is a way MP government is now portraying the success. That in terms of the subsidy, how much they are giving to the developers or the rescos, and how it is translating into an annual savings per year. So that is a great kind of way of showcasing how the subsidy amount is recovered in terms of savings to the government buildings. That's a fantastic kind of way of showcasing how the subsidy is being used 100% efficiently for leveraging such a huge benefit. This slide is on the data room. So most of the developers who are also in this conversation or outside, they will understand that they spend a lot of money on the customer acquisition, and the information is not kind of symmetrical. So there is a problem in that. So based on that, in MP, we identified close to around 500 sites, and we assessed each and every site. Out of the 500 sites, the people were sent to 115 sites physically, where they did all the calculations on site, and then they came back and then developed the whole software using the helioscope. And then the remaining 375 sites were done online based on the information provided by the government to us. So based on this, our data room was opened on the Google Drive, and all the bidders who purchased the tender had access to this. And of course, as I told you, they are free to go to any of those sites and cross-verify. But the feedback we received was awesome in terms of, they said it was the best access to the data they ever had for making an informed bidding. And it was well recognized, kind of an effort by the program for MP. And this idea was exclusively floated by Mr. Manu Srivastava, who is the Principal Secretary Power from MP, who said this is going to change the whole game, and it did actually. And therefore, we are doing similar to this currently. We are right now kind of doing a data room for 7 to 8 states, and we are now assessing close to around 2,000 buildings as we speak across these 8 states. So to conclude this theme, the question here is that, do you think really the developers are benefiting from this whole demand aggregation process? Because it offers a lot of benefits, as I explained to you before. And also the approach of the financing agencies towards this, largely because the states are doing the tenders, and therefore the RFP has an attachment of the terms and conditions of the financing institution. In case of MP, it was IDBI, SBI, and IRIDA who staple their financing terms along with the RFP as well, which means the winning bidders, if they are eligible, they can get access to that finance as well. The third, we are seeing that it's a categorization of the consumers. It's very easy to categorize them and then try to do the analysis and present it to the bidders. And also we see that the entire government machinery in Madhya Pradesh was kind of, the engagement was exemplary in terms of how they could supply data and provide the consent to implement the solar rooftop, and also sign PPAs with the government. Close to around 400 PPAs were signed in one single day within the system. With subdivisions, close to around 750 to 800 PPAs were signed one single day with the entire government agencies and the RESCOs. And that is what we feel is that demand aggregation is going to redefine the success of scaling up rooftop in the country. But I would like to kind of ask you also and think also whether this is going to be one of the way forward for accelerating the demand, accelerating the implementation and have a successful implementation. So moving on, this slide is my last slide, and this is largely based on my personal experience so far in the sector. Is that how to really basically empower the NBFCs, because I believe NBFCs are in positioned rightly to finance the rooftop solar sector right now, and at the same time their connect with the MSMEs are quite strong, and that's how to enable the MSMEs. So these are the areas which I'm now throwing at you to get your feedback, like where we should focus, and the DISCOM engaged models as we discussed before. And establishing a secondary market for rooftop sector. We have been talking about this for a long, but we haven't seeded this idea very strongly. So how to basically help the risks faced by many developers who have this issue of moving away from the existing consumer, and then how to create a value for the secondary market, which will also help them for on lending. The next aspect is the financing instrument. We have heard a lot. But we haven't seen one single model successfully working for solar rooftop. So that these are 3 kind of examples, but we like to hear more from you in terms of how we can take this forward. And the remote online monitoring and quality has a strong connect. We feel that the monitoring of medium-sized projects is very important and soon to be mandated by all the state governments, so that you get enough data to understand how the quality compliance is happening and how they can enforce the conditions in terms of putting the RESCO or the vendors to take them into task in terms if they are not kind of implementing the right way of the best practices. So of course, Aresco is taking a lot of risk by investing on their own, but are they adequately targeting all these areas where the quality could be improved and their O&M practices are the best available in the country, and how much compliance would help them to better their performance moving forward. So these are some ideas which we feel are few items which we should definitely take care moving forward and spend some resources. But this is not exhaustive, so I would also like to hear from you guys if there are any other ideas that needs attention, because accordingly we could develop these ideas in consultation with you also, and then try to ask World Bank and the ministry to consider for implementation. So it is not just idea sharing, but also we can take it forward by implementing it as well. So I would like to stop here and then hear more from you in terms of your second set of reactions on the presentation.
I can tell you that we're having a bit of a debate, Dinesh, about these numbers in the chat here with these, trying to figure out how people can make this work, and trying to back out a little bit what must be the subsidy embedded in all that. Maybe you could just address this question about, where there are substantial subsidy in these numbers. Is that, how do we move to a situation in which people get clarity? Of course, the margins now between the utility rate and the RESCO rate are massive, but of course the market will need to settle down into something slightly more, let's say, a cleaner number. Maybe you could share with us some views on how that process will evolve.
Yeah. So that's definitely the question which the MP government was very careful when they gave this information to the public. Of course, we have this debate that subsidy is a dirty money, but as I told you, it all depends on how you structure and leverage the subsidy that you are planning to offer to the public, and then how it is basically helping the industry to move forward. And at a particular stage, then you have to really phase it out. So in this case, the market was not misled, because there was a comparison between what would have been the tariff if there was no subsidy as well. And I could try to kind of show you. I'm not able to move my presentation. So I would try to see whether I can give you a couple of tables. But the answer is that there was a kind of calculation which we did in terms of what is happening, what would have happened if the subsidy has not been there, and that would also help the kind of consumers and the public largely aware of how the subsidy element has not distorted the market in terms of the misleading the market in terms of the whole process. So I will try to just show you this in terms of how the market would have been responded, or the RESCOs would have responded. Please also consider there were at least 5 to 8 major innovations which was done in this tender that had a major impact on the bidding. If Renew or anybody is on this in this conversation, they would also accept that the first one was there was an escalation allowed, tariff escalation of 3% allowed every year. So that also contributes to the lower tariff initially. Number 2, the subsidy was given, 50% of subsidy was given upfront if you give a bank guarantee. Number 2. Number 3, there was a letter of credit for the payment assurance, and then the sovereign guarantee by the state that is going to be a payment assurance for these guys in 2 layers. So that was another aspect. So based on this, the calculation was done. I will be happy to circulate a comprehensive table to all of you. For each and every category, whatever the tariff was discovered, there is a calculation what would have been the tariff if there was no subsidy. So from that angle also, we felt that the subsidy didn't go, the tariff didn't go beyond 3 rupee 50 paisa, if I'm right. But I'll be more than happy to share that after this call to the organizer. They will be more than happy to share it with you. But this calculation was done, and there was an article that was published quite widely in the leading newspapers to show that what is the lowest tariff, what was the subsidy, and then what was the savings to the state government, the exchequer, and then what would have been the tariff without the subsidy. This entire information was put together and it was published across the country.
That's great, thank you. So maybe we have time for just one more question here before we break out. If anyone wants to unmute their line and go ahead with their question.
Mr. Babu, this is Shubha. Are you doing this presently a similar model rooftop tender for any of the other state governments?
Yeah, so as I told you, we are now working with 8 states other than MP. Very recently, the Delhi government published 40 megawatt, but the conditions are not similar because in Delhi there is a generation-based incentive of 2 rupees. And the targeted audience right now in the tender, to start with, is residential welfare associations. It will move to the schools and education department very soon. So we are helping them. And right now, as we speak, the tender is kind of ongoing. Tomorrow, there is an opening on the technical bids. And we created a data room for Delhi as well. And similar help we are providing to Odisha and Assam, Rajasthan, Chhattisgarh, and Chandigarh.
And are you maintaining a centralized database? Why I'm asking this is, do you do this on a project-to-project basis, or are we eventually building a common database? And I think that's also what Mr. Srivastava has asked a little earlier in the chat, that is there a historic repository of whether bids or vendors or project details that we can refer to at a central level?
Right. So as I told you in the last slide, if you see, we are talking about this remote online monitoring. So we are also talking about creating a database in terms of the successful projects and how they are performing and what has been their kind of parameters based on which their performance is being assessed. So National Institute of Solar Energy is going to launch a centralized database system, which is nothing but an online monitoring system, but it will also act as a value-adding agency by doing a lot of analytics and also create a dashboard under the repository. But whether you will have free access to all this information is yet to decide, because we just started the work with them. And in terms of what MP has done, so now MP has a database for 45 megawatt of buildings. If your question is whether that will be put in a centralized database and it will be given access to everyone, I doubt that, because of the proprietary nature and also the sensitive nature of these buildings. But now it is in the public domain in terms of the bidders have already access to it, so they would have even shared it with anybody and everybody. But moving forward, it will be more structured in terms of how this database should be shown for the public to download or to research on it, or try to even package it and sell it as an information for further development of the sector. So it is still in the works right now.
Okay, because one aspect is the public accessing it, but the other aspect would be the other states accessing, data. Let's say Uttar Pradesh or Delhi accessing, the vendors or companies or such that MP had access to, instead of rebuilding from scratch.
Yes, so that is the link that we are providing right now, though it is offline. But moving forward, that's a great suggestion, I would say, that we would also try to create an online portal for preparing that kind of information and categorizing them so that the state can very easily select the information which they want. Instead of just accessing a big pool of information, we could then filter it accordingly so that they can use it when they want to launch similar tenders. But that's a great suggestion.
Okay, thank you. That's it.
Great. With that, we should close and let people get on with their day. I'll just say, Dinesh, thank you very much for your time and for all this great information. We will I'll also be happy to, as you say, post that additional material onto the learning platform so that that's available for people. And just to the rest of the course participants, I'll say thank you very much for joining us. We definitely, this is the close of one phase of the project, and we look forward to being in touch with you over the next few weeks as this moves into its next phase. And both Shubha and myself will be in touch. So best wishes, and we will be in touch soon. Thank you again, Dinesh, and have a great day.
Thank you so much, Charles, and thank you all the participants for patience hearing. I'll be in touch with you very soon. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye.